Hello, everyone, and welcome to this TM Forum webinar on reigniting telecoms growth and something that we're calling the CEO Playbook. My name's Dean Ramsey. I'm Principal Analyst at TM Forum. I'm hosting today's session, and we have two very esteemed guests with us today, Nick Willits from TM Forum and Manish Vyas from Tech Mahindra. Nick's here in the room with me in London. So I'd like to ask our guests to just introduce themselves and say a little bit about their role before we get going with the content. So Nick, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Dean. Delighted to be here today. Super important topic for the industry. It's on everybody's mind. The question on everybody's lips is, how do we reignite growth? And I believe we're doing some pretty interesting work here that starts to really shape the choices, frame what those look like, and some really practical steps to actually get this done.
Great, thanks, Nick. And Manish, could you say hello to our audience and give us a little intro on your current role, please?
Hello, everybody. And, my apologies for that long, twisty, title, because I'm not as good looking as Nick is. I need to add that so many words to describe what I do here at Tech Mahindra. I am essentially responsible for, and have been responsible for several years for the business that we do with all the telecom ecosystem worldwide. And so happy to be here, Dean, with you and with Nick today.
Great, thanks, Manish. So a little note on housekeeping before we start. Today's session will be about 45 minutes long. First of all, Nick and I are going to run through a few slides to describe exactly what the CEO Playbook is and what we're seeing in terms of telcos building growth into their strategy for the next decade. There will be an opportunity for people on the live session to interact with us through the Q&A. So if you open the Q&A function there, not the chat function, we'll keep an eye on that throughout, and I'll introduce your questions to the panel as we go. So what is the CEO Playbook? It's something that we've been working on here at TM Forum in conjunction with Tech Mahindra for a few months. It's something that's been going on a lot longer than that. It's the culmination of lots of the activities that goes on around TM Forum, both inside the organization and in the wider membership, the operators that's come together to co-create and hammer out industry challenges and problems around TM Forum. It's centered around the problem that is probably a very familiar story to you. The industry has very little growth at the moment and has had very little growth for the last decade or so. I run the research and media part of TM Forum. As part of that activity, we look at revenue numbers and profit margins amongst the telco community, the largest telcos in the world, and there's basically no growth. So, if you look out beyond the city walls of telecoms, there's a tech boom happening. There are $100 billion companies in double-digit growth. We as an industry are not taking part in that, and many of these companies are our partners and suppliers. So it's not something that's hugely removed from our world. So lots of the things that we've been doing to address that over the last decade have involved heavy investment. We're not scared as an industry of investing incredibly heavily in technology. But that is proving not to be able to buy us what we want in terms of pushing forwards. And so from our perspective within TM Forum, lots of the operators, progressive operators that we work with are starting to see some hotspots of growth. But those are coming not from their core business, not from their core connectivity business or traditional telco models. They're coming from a different way of thinking and a different approach. And so what the CEO Playbook is an attempt to bring those learnings together and build an instructional blueprint for how the telecoms industry can start pushing towards a much more widespread attitude towards growth. So we have engaged with a company called Platform Thinking Labs, who are experts, and they are renowned authors around platform business models for that outside-in perspective. They work with many other industry verticals, and so we see analogs outside of telecoms with other industries that have very similar characteristics, but they are experiencing growth and high profit margins. And so we're kind of looking at how that relates to our world. And we wanted them to come in and kind of validate some of our thinking, so we're not existing within an echo chamber. So the first output from that activity is a document which is on its way. We're in the final stages of drafting that. So many of you on the call today will be reaching out to you to kind of help us finalize that and interact with us around what these instructional blueprints actually look like. So what we thought we'd do today is we'd take you through some of the core beliefs and the concepts that are work within this document, and look at the roadmap of how that's going to play out over the next few months as we do some more activities to push this activity forward. So Nick, you're going to tell us a little bit about these core beliefs that are shaping our industry.
That's right. Thanks, Dean. So as Dean said, I think we're all familiar with the context, but this is a very exciting time to be in this industry because there's so much happening. There's so many opportunities. There's so many buzzwords. What we thought would be helpful to set the scene as we put together this playbook is to say, what do we really believe are the fundamentals of what's going to happen and need to happen in order to unlock growth? There's 4 beliefs you can see on the slide here. I'll just walk you through quickly. The first is that we need to transform the way we look at the products we deliver. So as an industry, we're used to showing up with a technology. We talk in terms of generations of mobile technology, 4G, 5G. We talk about fiber and other kinds of fixed connectivity. What we don't talk about enough and what we need to pivot to is delivering solutions. And so our first belief is that, yes, connectivity is going to be incredibly important, even more important and fundamental to enterprise digitization and the next generation of Web3 apps and the evolution of the internet. That goes without saying, but that connectivity itself has to be upgraded to meet the needs of that environment. And that connectivity can no longer be a standalone technology. It needs to be delivered as a service, pre-integrated with other technologies such as cloud and edge, increasing uses of AI, IoT, and many other technologies as well. The second belief as a consequence of that is that we can no longer sell and really deliver the products for B2B and B2B2X services in the way we have been. If you look at the way most B2B connectivity is bought and sold, the way it's serviced, the way it's looked after, it really hasn't changed for about 40 years. It's still a very similar sales model, service model, and so on. And it works on a very utilitarian model. To really shift to being as a service, that means delivering it in a purely digital way. That means delivering it through not only our platforms, but partner platforms, multiple marketplaces, and it being controlled and accessible and a service that can be turned up and down using APIs. That's a big shift from where we are today. The good news is all of the technology exists to do this. Programmable networks can offer a whole range of new differentiating products that allow us to get out of a spiral of only differentiating on cost. But in order to do it, we have to recognize that go-to-market needs to fundamentally change. Third core belief is perhaps a fact and a belief at the same time. We are, as an industry, stuck in what I call a growth paradox. We are one of very few industries that can experience 200 to 300% increase in demand, as we saw during the pandemic, and fail to capitalize on that in any financial way. So we've actually looked at the kinds of returns across multiple industries during the pandemic, and we can see that telco is second to last in terms of actually achieving any good results from that. That's just further evidence that our business model needs to change and that we need to get out of this cost-centric differentiation model. The fourth belief, and what I think the playbook is starting to really show us, is that for all of the noise and complexity and trying to emulate what other industries are doing, what we can now see is 2 key facts. Firstly, the market landscape has shifted. In fact, it's been shifting for about the last 10 to 15 years. But I think it's only now that as an industry, we're really recognizing the implications of that for us as an industry. And secondly, that there's actually a pretty distinct set of strategic choices that telecom operators can choose between in terms of where they play, where they have a right to play, where they can add value, and what they can do. Underpinning all of that is the fact that we have to move fast. Our enterprise customers are digitizing very quickly, accelerated by the pandemic. We have to act now because we have a limited window of opportunity to transform the way we do business and unlock this growth opportunity. Dean.
Great, thanks, Nick. Could I have the next slide, please? So, just as a taster of some of the contents of the playbook document, we wanted to kind of show you today some of the thinking around why we think a lot of these problems exist, why these challenges exist for telecoms operators. If we think about the vertically integrated telco, the classical telecoms company, it's set up in vertical silos. I know that as the forum, we spend a lot of time talking about the IT architectures that exist within operations in those telcos. That mirrors those vertical silos, but it's not just an IT problem. It's the whole mechanism, the whole structure internally of the company that exists to serve a traditional telco business model, and it was built that way to do exactly that. It's built for purpose. Now that things have changed, and the playing field on which we're playing now is very different. And it's very difficult for operators to shift those siloed vertical models to exploit new value pools and address new opportunities, especially in highly competitive digital markets. These are not greenfield opportunities. They are being addressed by digital natives who are very agile and have come of age in the cloud era. So it's becoming very obvious that telcos building platform models across a horizontal layered ecosystem, and who are partnering voraciously. They are selecting technology options that are very agile and enable them with modular technologies to swap and change how those internal mechanisms are from one day to the next. Those are the entities that are the best positioned to be able to try and address new business models, innovate new business models, and create new services for the next generation of telcos. A business diversification strategy through a readjustment of what the company looks like on the inside. So what we've done within the playbook as well is we've looked at other industries, financial services, digital retail, industries where there are many similarities with telco. They're heavily regulated, they're very tech-centric. In places they have networks, things can be learnt from them. And if you look at their own industry a decade ago, they're in a very similar position to how we are in telco now, but have made some very positive moves to change their lot, and it is paying dividends. So we've done an analysis of that, what it looks like, and how that value migration might pan out for telcos if they make a series of moves, which we're laying out in the playbook. Now, one of those moves is something that I'm sure you're familiar with. It's the delayering, the structural separation of the telco. So Maureen, if we could have the next slide, please. Nick's going to talk us through what this looks like.
Thanks, Dean. So this is our simplified visual of what the new landscape looks like for us as an industry, and in fact, the services and digital infrastructure around us as well. So you can see across the left-hand side there, options ranging from A to D. And this is what I referenced just a moment ago in terms of the choices for telecom operators in terms of where they play. So we're increasingly using this landscape with a range of senior executive teams in the telco industry as we refine this to say, where do your products and ambitions sit? Where are you trying to play? And there's a range of different strategies in play here that we can touch on in the conversation today. Just to explain the landscape a little bit more, we start in familiar territory at the bottom of the blue box in the delayered view of the telco. And it's important to say when we're talking about delayering that this doesn't have to mean structural separation. We've obviously seen a lot of separation of infracos, particularly towerco businesses, attracting very attractive valuations. That allows consolidation of physical infrastructure that can make a lot of sense. So we're all pretty familiar with that. The big discovery we've made in building the playbook and on our work with our members is that the most critical part of that delayering concept when it comes to actually unlocking growth sits in the operating models behind those. So the netco itself and the infraco obviously are asset-heavy businesses. These are typically debt-driven investments paid back over time, and they have asset-heavy operating models. And most telcos have that in their DNA because that's where they've started life. The reality is to innovate fast enough, to be able to partner rapidly, to be able to actually be part of the digital ecosystem and unlock that growth. At the same time, you need in the ServCo piece to have an asset light operating model. That means fundamentally different KPIs, different ways of measuring success, different mindset. And this is one of the big challenges for telco, is how to be essentially ambidextrous. On one hand, good at what we're great at, which is the asset heavy business management. We may criticize ourselves for that, but actually compared to a lot of industries, we do it very well. But the asset light part is the part where a lot of these innovation initiatives struggle to take scale and to actually achieve success, because they're simply not pieces of our DNA today. So there's a lot of change to happen in the way connectivity is delivered and the structure of the telco, and this delayering theme we think will continue, but we're really putting the emphasis on the actual operating model rather than the legal structure of the business. Now, there's of course many different companies down there. As Dean just mentioned, the fragmentation of the industry is another challenge for us to overcome. And some of that fragmentation is going to be addressed at the next layer up, we call integration platforms. These are companies who are bringing together the capabilities of multiple infrastructure providers and stitching them into some kind of integrated solution. Examples in telco could be companies like Twilio, who take away for an end user developer having to even understand which network or which protocol they need to use to get in contact or start a SMS or voice message with a user. In the financial services industry, you've got companies like Stripe. Now, there's a number of key factors we see to these companies: great developer experience, developer ecosystem, taking away the fragmentation problem, and many other factors as well. So they're a distinct layer that we've seen emerge, and we think will continue to be very important in that defragmentation piece. And finally, in the top layer, we're actually into building some sort of solution, and there'll be companies who both combine capabilities to build generic solution bundles. Those can be companies with existing large software capabilities like Salesforce, who may then combine that with other capabilities. They may be specialists for different industry verticals. There'll be a plethora of different expertise there. And those companies are all leveraging what you see on the right-hand side, which is a range of solutions marketplaces. Now, in telco, the challenge is where to play in this map. Where do we have right to play? What does it take to play in those layers? And what does it actually mean to be part of those different ecosystems? And that's part of what the playbook explores. What is important to really take to heart is the fact that we have to understand this landscape and what it takes just to exist even in the blue layers in order to really thrive and unlock growth.
I think that during this process as well, it's been really interesting bringing some shape and definition to what it means by partner ecosystem above the northbound out of the telco, because it's one of those things that is talked about in every industry dialogue. So we've brought some real shape to that, and I think that's really interesting. Could I have the next slide, please? So what we wanted to stress too is that we're not advising anything that will crash core connectivity business. This is something that has business continuity at the heart of it. We are aware that 90% of a telco's business is around traditional telco models, and consumer mobile is a huge chunk of that. Anything that we've assessed has that at the heart of it, but it also is about the real power of delayering or structural separation or whatever degree of it an operator chooses. The real power of that is in the options that are provided by splitting out that asset light ServCo to be able to address entirely different, maybe non-telco, non-connectivity related service models, things that do leverage the power of the connectivity that they have in the netco and the infraco below them. So you create these two zones of a very asset-centric telco, which is the network part. We know how to do this. The telcos are very adept at this. It's very capital intensive, but they are now focusing on capital efficiency and getting return on those capital investments. They're focusing on automation and the move to the cloud, softwareization of the network. Out in the RAN, we're seeing a big focus on edge and technologies like Open RAN are bringing that SDN programmable technology to the network. That space is changing a great deal to become more efficient, to become more green, less power hungry. So we're seeing some big changes there. But obviously, if you split out this ServCo layer above it, that is a huge fundamental change for an operator, and it may mean that it brings a big change to the competitive landscape too. You could have multiple servcos sitting on top of one netco. You could have pan-geography servcos operating in multiple adjacent geographies. It changes the landscape immensely, or it has potential to change the landscape. And so lots of the main points of the telco to techco story are encapsulated in this. How do we make fundamental changes to our staffing? So one point here is around, solution sales force. There are examples in the playbook that we've cited where companies have changed their attitude towards their sales function, and it's made a huge difference to their ability to address markets like the small medium enterprise space, which telco has traditionally found very, very difficult. So it's not just a technology analysis that we're making. It's a series of component pieces to a more holistic view of what a possible growth strategy could look like and how it could be very successful. So on the next slide, please, we have, this is our final slide for today, but it talks a little bit around what are these component pieces beyond technology. Nick, do you want to talk to this a little?
Yeah, so you can see the 7 different areas we've identified. When we use this big word operating model, gets thrown around a lot. We're breaking that down in the playbook into the really what's behind it. So of course, the right leadership, clarity of business case, really this solution orientated, what's the real customer need? And the big pivot there is this level of customer understanding. Whether we like it or not as an industry, we don't really understand in depth our customers' needs typically at scale, and our ability to understand what they need and the level of flexibility needed is very clear to play in this new landscape. Ecosystem management, equally, managing a plethora of partnerships, a plethora of go-to-market channels is a new operational challenge. It's pretty easy to stand up some of these services for day one, but day 2 and day 3, and doing that at scale on what can be quite thin margins, also require a new set of muscles. Topics like agility and talent aren't new to the industry, but we're talking about quite a long way ahead of where we deliver today as an industry in terms of time to market. Although we've seen big improvements, there's still a long way to go. And recognizing that talent is a big shift in everything from Salesforce to technology skills, quite a lot of reskilling and upskilling and insourcing required to actually make that work, and new kinds of partnerships who really get it. Technology, obviously a topic close to the heart of the TM Forum, very much directly supporting a lot of our thinking behind open digital architecture and open APIs, the need for a composable technology architecture, reusable technology blocks that can actually be stitched together and adapted quickly to meet different customer needs, and that can scale to those needs. And the 2 new areas that you might have heard less about before that have come out through the playbook, first of all, the ability to really move much faster and in lockstep with regulation, where we as an industry tend to look at regulation as something that's holding us back. There's a lot of new regulation that's going to come in around security, privacy, use of AI in the next few years. We as an industry need to be ahead of that, both helping to shape it, but also helping to react to it and finding opportunity in it in a positive way. And risk management, there's a whole new set of risks in this world that we also have to navigate. So the playbook explores each of those 7 areas in more detail. And what that boils down to is that as what we call a platform ready telco or operator, there's a whole new set of toolbox of capabilities needed, and we're plotting out who's doing that, how it can be done, and finding practical steps forward. And that, of course, is core to the TM Forum's mission as well.
Great. So that's it for our presentation today. So Manish, lots to take in there, I think, but not anything new to you, I'm sure. So what we wanted to achieve in this project was an optimistic view of, a pragmatic but optimistic view of attempting to drive growth in the industry. How optimistic are you about telco's chances of escaping from this growth paradox that Nick was talking about?
Now, I'll straight away address your question, but then before I elaborate on it, I want to say something more. So first things first, your question is very rhetorical. How optimistic am I? I'm extremely optimistic, and I have a lot of reasons to believe that way. History for one. is one thing that tells us that telcos, this service provider industry has been resilient, has had this unbelievable, uncanny ability to reinvent itself, has this ability to withstand any external pressures that may have come. And yes, I absolutely applaud TM Forum's efforts to start working on the growth conundrum, because this problem has now honestly remained on the forefront of the telco industry for a little longer than I think all of us would have wanted it to be. So for us to address this, take this head on, I think is truly phenomenal. What I wanted to say is, I particularly like and always like your last page that you showed. It is simple. You're distilling the 7 building blocks very nicely around the changes the things which are already strength of the industry from incumbency standpoint, right? For example, very right of that slide, as I looked at it, was the regulatory tailwinds. I think we have seen in recent times that the governments of the world, across the world, developed and developing markets, have all had an inherent need for their population to participate a lot more in the internet economy. As a result, they've worked with the telcos and have created funds to improve the broadband connectivity. And as a result, we have seen several initiatives in the last few years with what telcos have done everywhere in the world, in Asia, in Middle East, in Europe, in America, in terms of deploying more and more assets towards higher quality fiber networks. So we know what they can do. And you addressed that in one of your previous slides about the capacity aspect. They've been phenomenal with that. Managing the capacity, building the capacity. How many of us can ever forget what happened in 2020 in March, April timeframes during COVID was a massively disruptive period of time for humanity and for industry at large. And yet, if there was one industry that withstood that challenge, that demonstrated their resilience, and the point that Nick was making earlier, that their demand went up 200 times, even if you say that metaphorically, and supported all of us, anything we wanted to do so remarkably well. Given these fundamental strengths of the industry, I think there is only a tiny little problem to solve, and that is to get a little bit extra dollars into the bank from a revenue standpoint. Rest of the building blocks, rest of the fundamentals of the telcos are so strong. That's what basically drives me to always say this, and I don't think I'll ever cease saying this, that I believe it may take time, but the growth opportunity and the ability of the industry to get to the growth task, I think is fantastic. I'm a huge eternal optimist on this question, Dean.
And so I guess my follow-on question from that is that, we've this growth paradox has been going on for many years now, but we are starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel, some hot spots of growth along the lines of new service models, interesting new diversification strategies. What do we think is different now? Why in 2023 should we expect that it to be any different to in 2013? Nick, maybe start with you on that.
I think that there's a few factors in play. First of all, we've come a long way as an industry since 2013. So I know there's skeptics out there who would say, well, we're still talking about APIs, we're still talking about monetizing services, but we as an industry now actually know what an API is, which we didn't in 2013. We understand and culture, ways of working, technology stacks, approach to business models. The digital ecosystem itself has evolved enormously in that time. So factor one is we've come a long way. Factor two is I think we as an industry now better understand this landscape. And that's part of what we're trying to do with this playbook, is to make it actually digestible. But we're now starting to understand who plays where. Still some things to figure out there, still the right paths to follow. But there's now an urgency with that as well to say, actually, we realize now there's a window opportunity. And I hear that echoed in boardrooms as I have the privilege of working with companies all around the world, that now is the time. We have to get this done, and we're prepared to be perhaps radical enough now to do that. And the final ingredient of why is that our customers actually now need this. So a lot of the technologies we've talked about in terms of edge, AI and so on, what we've forgotten in that debate within the industry, even 5G monetization, is you've got to have customers who have use cases that demand those technologies. And you've therefore got to wait for your customers to digitize to the point that those technologies are ready and that they trust them and that they're actually going to be fit for purpose. And that takes time, just as we in our industry have had to go through our own transformation. Every single industry is on the journey, perhaps a little behind telco in some cases, in many cases. And therefore, only now and only in the next 2 to 3 years, in my view, will there actually be the kind of demand we expect for these technologies.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it's kind of the digitalization versus digitization story of there's very little point in spending billions of dollars on new technology, moving everything to the cloud, if you're going to replicate old business models and old ways of working with new things. It makes very little sense. And so it feels like we're only just getting to that point where new business models new operating models are coming to the fore. We might see that in B brands, bigger operators launching sub brands to try out speculative new business models and then pushing that back into the mothership. But Manish, are you what are you seeing along the lines of the new operating models and new business models?
I'll tell you what has changed in the last few years is there have been more successful case studies of people having adopted, people as in industry players having created and adopted and then succeeded in building digital platforms, in creating adjacencies. Because let's face it, one thing that I think is extremely enviable if you were not in the telecom industry, and that is the customer stickiness.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The telco customers go nowhere. They stay. They've been very loyal. They love the devices. They love the connectivity. They love the engagement, and they love the power of these devices. I think some of the operators, and without naming any one or two specific here, because there are few now who have started leveraging the platform approach that you described in one of your slides. They've started leveraging those to build adjacencies.
Yeah.
Right. By that slide about saying move away from the fragmentation of a verticalized industry to a more horizontal layer, I think is spot on in my view, because you're taking advantage of each layer as you start building it, and you're exposing yourselves and your services to different parts of the industry, both to the consumers or to the enterprises, in a more platform fashion. I guess that mature approach, which we have also seen in the web scale and the internet world in the last 10, 15 years, people have dominated based on that approach.
Yeah.
With that API approach, with the platform approach, with the service layer on top. I guess as we continue to build that, listen to all the things that you said on that last slide, including collaboration and partner with the ecosystem, I think some of the companies have started doing that and have already started yielding results. I mean, there are examples where, one of our dear friends and operator in Southeast Asia has built a couple of $1 billion of business in fintech, standing on top of their core telco platform.
Yeah.
That's the way to go. I guess we need to continue to build that.
And I think you're spot on, Manish. And one of the things that's exciting when we see that happening is the stickiness of the core connectivity product only goes up. So you get essentially a double hit. You get the benefit of new revenues because you're part of a solution for a customer, but then your core connectivity product itself is also then a much stickier proposition as part of that. So just as we've admired as an industry the kind of stickiness of some of the hyperscale platforms, I think it's showing that telco can achieve that. And these are meaningful growth numbers we're now seeing. This isn't just offsetting decline in other areas. We're starting to see evidence it can happen. I wanted to bring back something you said, Dean, which I think is very important. You talked about the need for, I would summarize it as simplification. And one of the things that Manish and I like to swap notes on is this topic, which is one I know core to Tech Mahindra. Manish, I think behind the playbook and behind a lot of the work you do, the need to simplify what is a very complex, perhaps over complex industry product set, organizational structures, you name it, it's got to be simplified. But that is at the heart of this ability to move fast enough and partner easily. Can you tell us a bit about what you're seeing in the market in terms of, and why you think simplification is so important?
It's very simple. That question is very, very simple. And that is, it's all about money, honey, as they say. Because unless you simplify your system architectures, your process flows, your operating models, back end, front end, both, one will not be able to generate enough money in the existing operation to then fund all these innovation and agility and talent acquisition and partnership models, business model change. So simplicity is not just one independent standalone parameter and metric that one needs to attack. I think it's the foundation in our view, and which is why Tech Mahindra is bet big on the whole concept of simplicity, and simplify as the first word of the 3 words that we are driving all our solutions around. As you simplify your operating model, your cost base, your OpEx, your people aspect, find better ways to do the same thing that we have been doing for years and generations, that money is going to come back and feed into the next layer, which is what you've also articulated in the playbook now so beautifully, and that is about modernization, right? And eventually, once you do these two, because the modernization allows you to build that platform and be ready in an API economy to be able to take the world on. Once you do these 2 things, only then can you solve the problem of monetization and growth. So hence, to your question, why simplicity is so important is because we are not attacking simplicity, we are attacking monetization and growth. But to do that, we have to attack simplicity first. And that is why we are over-indexing, over-investing, and emphasizing with any operator, any industry player that we talk to, that our first promise is to continue to help simplify. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And one of the questions that we see coming in from the audience just now is are we complicating or simplifying the technology architecture? I think it's a more complex question than it sounds on first reading. There is obviously some rising complexity in the technology that we use, and we've learned that over the last decade in deploying 5G. But if you can have an overarching strategy about your architectures and the way that you deploy software, and your end-to-end strategy that's a lot more holistic, it overcomes some of those complexity pools within the technology stack. And so none of the things that we've talked about around delayering would be possible if we went about 5G in a way that was the same as 2G or 3G, because the cleave points wouldn't be there across the OSS, BSS network, IT architectures. And so I think it's all about a holistic overarching strategy that is componentized and composable.
Yeah.
If you allow me, sorry, Dean, a little cheekiness here, I would say to arrive at simplicity or simpler model, you got to do some complex things.
Yeah.
And that's the technology part that you're referring to. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say very much the same, Manish. I think anything that's new or different can appear complex on the surface. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, to me, what we're actually going through is just facing the reality of the complexity we have. So it's pretty easy to draw this nice, clean telco architecture of technology and say, well, there's this box and this box and this box. Anybody who's worked in this industry for more than 5 minutes knows within each of those boxes is another 100 boxes, and within those is another 100 boxes, and it quickly becomes incredibly hard to see end-to-end what's going on. That's why quite often in technology teams in the telco world, there's big silos of expertise, be it network or IT orientation, and within those specialisms. So this is complex stuff, but there is great opportunity to simplify and modularize it to the point that we can actually reuse it. So we in TM Forum think it's time to give up thinking about OSS, BSS, and the sort of logical flow that things go through in a very traditional systems architecture, and say these have to be reusable capabilities. And depending on the service, depending on the customer, depending on the partnership, I'm going to need different building blocks to do what I need to do. So you're absolutely right, Manish. You've got to sort of face the complexity. You've got to be honest about the complexity, and then you can make it simpler to use and operate. And I think we're on the pathway to that. But as a whole industry, we've got to get away from the sense that we're not complex. We are incredibly complex.
Yeah, I just remember, Dean and Nick, a very recent example, and we collaborated with you on this in terms of understanding the ODA architecture and the various utilities that one can use that is available. One measure of success for simplicity is time. Do we save time? Can we do things faster? Can we realize the potential of technology faster? It used to take a couple of years to do any transformation project around the systems and putting a new platform. We just finished phase 2 of a remarkable project for a Singapore fantastic operator. The time it took to do that, I still am getting goosebumps about, could we have done that fast? Really? I mean, is it really true? But it is a fact that we have realized the potential. It looked at the outset, to your point, a very complex architecture, but it was necessary because we wanted to take advantage of all the forces that are there in the ecosystem, not just do everything ourselves, not just let them do everything themselves, but take advantage of all the opportunities and capabilities. But focus on one thing. Can we get the outcomes sooner? In 5.5 months time, we had the platform ready and it hit the road running hard. I guess those are the examples that we need more and more in the industry to be able to realize the full potential. So we could here simplicity in terms of installing a new tech architecture was done. Hence modernization was achieved. I'm certain this operator will have a better position now to monetize and create that growth as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. So continuing from that, the changes that we're seeing within the telco are becoming more obvious. The growth strategy for the next decade seems extremely reliant on partner ecosystem. Now, this is a term that we hear in any industry webinar, but there's very little context around it. Usually it's just, oh, there's the partner ecosystem above telco. What do we think is which of those relationships are the most profound? What do telcos need to double down on in terms of their relationships with enterprises and hyperscalers and wholesalers? Manish, how do you see that kind of panning out with the customers that you're working with?
Yeah, I think, look, there is lots and lots of chatter and discussions around it. It's easier said than done. This is probably the most, I would say, the difficult aspect of creating that, creating that additional value. And that is because there are multiple companies and players who need to come together and agree what is that 1 + 1 = 3 shared value picture. But then in recent times, we have seen a chip manufacturer working very well with a network OEM, working together with an operator to build some services for a few industrial use cases going forward. That, I think, is one of the great examples that we are seeing increasingly, right? Where we're looking to see, you mentioned earlier that unlike in the first generation IoT world, where the telcos were looking to go and be their integrators themselves, and deploy a whole host of people all across the world to try and integrate the devices and the sensors. I don't think that's a value proposition. I don't think that's a core competence. So to find a partner who can go make that happen, while the telcos and the service providers focus on building that platform and enabling monetization of the connectivity layer, I think is the right way to go. Yeah. I think that realization is becoming more and more apparent. Because if you see the narrative of some of the CEOs, where they are saying that, hey, our core business is fundamentally very strong. We just want to be ready for Web3. We just want to be ready for Industry 4.0. We just want to be ready for what happens in the metaverse world. We want to be ready with what Gen AI will start throwing as opportunities. Early days, granted, but clearly there is an evolution of thought that I don't have to do everything. Because people have proven that you don't have to do everything to succeed.
And that's exactly what we're driving to with that landscape, is to say, I think you go back 5 years in the sense was you had to be all over that landscape. And now there's a recognition, as Manish says quite rightly, that I'm really good at this bit. This is my right to play here. What can I do that are adjacent to that? What can I do that changes around that? I think back to your question, Dean. First of all, let's be clear what partner means, because this is a bit like the word platform. It's used and abused. To me, a partnership is the shared risk and reward. I'm actually doing something together. So this isn't just washing an existing vendor relationship. This has actually got to be a genuine partnership. And at each layer of that landscape, there's different partnerships needed. There's partnerships genuinely developing new technology solutions with the providers of that, say cloud providers, AI providers and others. Then there's the defragmentation part of this and who you partner with to achieve that and get to new go-to-market channels through solution marketplaces. And then there's the changing relationship with companies, system integrators, as we traditionally call them, who are very close to and typically the relied on technology partner for an enterprise to actually build solutions coming from the telco industry into that future business. And that's the sweet spot we think is not being realized enough today. But I think for any telco, first of all, where do you want to play? And then secondly, where you don't want to play, you've got to have partners in order to actually thrive and unlock growth.
Notice I didn't ask Manish how profound he thinks the relationship is between telcos and systems integrators. Yeah, so that's interesting. Look, one thing I wanted to touch on before we start to wrap up today is this concept of mindset. We often hear that a new mindset is needed. Manish, what do you think that means? What is this new mindset, and how would it inform all of the other pieces of the strategy?
I think it's a wonderful question. I just scrolled through the Q&A and I think it probably lends itself to the question you are asking. That question is not about mindset, but capabilities. And I profoundly agree with that your question on mindset plus the capabilities of leadership both go hand in hand. My take, and again, I'm not trying to say this because I'm an optimist here. A few months ago, at that event that we hosted in Barcelona, you saw some of the telco leaders very, not in a very polite manner, but a rather very stern fashion, addressing this elephant in the room, that we got to change our mindset, we got to take the bull by the horns, and we got to attack with capabilities in leadership at technology and management level to be able to adopt this new change, understand this new change, to Nick's point, understand what partnership truly means. It's not just, a give or a take, but it has a give and a take and a shared value. And then to start driving those and, driving those changes. I'll tell you, the problem is not as much about capabilities here. I think it is not even just the mindset issue. I think it is a combination of a third element, and which is the fiscal pressures that the telcos have, right? Which is where there is a stop and a start. And that I think is a bigger bane today in my view, because every time there is a macro level uncertainty, and it's easier for me to say, but I'm sure it is very, very hard for the board and the CEOs and the CFOs to deal with this. But it is about transformation cannot be a train that runs at 60 miles an hour, then 20, and then 60, and then 20, and then stops. This is a train that needs to continue to move much faster and consistently. That I think is a big conundrum. That is a big issue. And I don't think, at least I have an answer for it, or I don't even know how to deal with it. That probably would be my question back to the industry in terms of how we will deal with it. Because once we deal with it, I have seen enough evidences across the world of leaders who have absolutely the right mindset. I mean, if you show these 7 slides to any of them, they will understand, appreciate, agree with each word on them, probably. 2, I have seen that the capabilities are pretty solid. I think it is to solve this other little vexed problems in terms of how to prioritize and not prioritize. That's bothering us for a while.
Yeah.
That's my take on it.
I think you're hitting on a really important point, Manish, and a couple of things I'll just add to what you're saying. Number one, the research we've done in the playbook shows that despite current economic pressures, most of the enterprise customers are not slowing down the digitization program. So if there's one thing that's been ring-fenced out of all the cost cutting and caution in the current macroeconomic situation, companies are saying, I can't slow down on that. And I think that's largely a reaction to what they learned during the pandemic. So the telco, our customers are getting on with this. So the train is still moving at 60 for them. I think within our industry, you're absolutely right. There's 2 big challenges we've identified that need to be addressed. One is shareholder education. We as an industry are not doing a great job of explaining where this growth can come from and illustrating that. And so shareholders are looking at the basics and perhaps questioning a lot of this belief in new technologies to solve the problem. And the second part is, I think back to this point on mindset is where it links in, is we're still in some ways operating in the mindset of build it and they will come. And we need to change that mindset to build solutions with partners, and we'll unlock a bigger opportunity. That's quite a fundamental difference. So the amount we're plowing into building out new networks, 5G networks, to meet demand makes sense, but to meet new growth opportunities in isolation doesn't make sense. And so tapering that with where you put your priorities, it's a really tough question, but I think it's a really important one. We have to say, how do we get the right balance?
Yeah. And for our audience, that event that Manish was talking about was a room full of C-level execs from telcos who are part of this process of helping us validate these concepts and work with ourselves and Tech Mahindra in kind of building these concepts. And it's not just our opinion; it's been tested quite heavily against some very senior members of our world. So, Nick, how does this all relate to the things that TM Forum currently do, and what the strategy is for the next few years?
So, first of all, as you said, Dean, this isn't academic research. This is something we're building out and testing with our members, and testing and looking for examples, looking for evidence of getting outside in opinions, and making sure we're not an echo chamber, as you said at the start. And then for TM Forum, we're translating that into what are the most important problems the industry can collaborate on. Some will be very familiar. Open digital architecture as a composable architecture. Everything we're finding through the playbook only reinforces how integral that capability is to growth. Upskilling and reskilling existing teams, another area where we put a lot of emphasis on what do those teams look like, what's the right tech organizational design, what's the right split in skill sets, and so on. Another area where our members are coming together to offer the right advice. We think automation, and specifically AI, is incredibly important to moving at the right speed and cost point. Huge amount to do there, alongside the simplification Manish mentioned earlier. Another area where we have vibrant programs in TM Forum. So we're actually quite shamelessly using the CEO Playbook to say, are we doing the right things as an industry? And that's the TM Forum membership coming together. So far, we're getting good validation, also some good steer where we need to think more carefully about things like multi-marketplace readiness, partner ecosystem management, topics we know well in the forum, but we've got to actually adjust for what the playbook's showing us as well. There's a huge amount going on. I think this is all about, for us in TM Forum, fulfilling our mission, which is to get this industry back to growth.
Right. And this document forms the first part of a series of events that run towards our event in Copenhagen, Digital Transformation World, in September. So I think, Maureen, we have a couple of slides showing what to expect in terms of the coming months. This is, as Nick said, it's part of a progression rather than being a fire and forget exercise that is just academic. It's a living and breathing piece of research, if you like, and so as such we got a roadmap for this, and it will be refreshed as and when we feel that enough has changed for us to make those changes. So, yeah, Nick, would you like to talk about how this relates to DTW?
Yeah, so TM Forum's flagship event, DTW Ignite, takes place in September. The clue's in the name on Ignite. It's all about igniting innovation, igniting collaboration, and igniting growth. That's what the TM Forum is here to achieve. This is very different to a big sort of typical industry event, because it's all about the industry coming together for these real conversations, that real honesty we always aim to achieve. So you'll see the playbook on show there, a lot of aspects of the playbook being debated across sessions, be it everything from the keynote stage through to our private impact program. And it's a great opportunity to come together both at a senior level and at a very tactical level to actually look at what these capabilities are that we need to develop, the strategies to actually put these in place, to learn from one another. That's really at the heart of what we do at our DTW events. We'll move to the next slide. A big part of that, where the playbook will be used heavily, is in our Impact Summit. This is a 2-day part of the program, which is really getting executives in a private setting the opportunity to share experiences, looking at, for example, how we really drive network monetization. We think we need to go a lot further with efforts to really think about new products and harmonize those across the industry, and how we can actually play in this new ecosystem and leveraging on that knowledge we're accumulating in the playbook. Leading up to that, of course, we in TM Forum will be doing a lot of individual sessions with companies and group sessions to build up to that. But we certainly hope everybody can join us in Copenhagen in September for what promises to be a really instrumental event in what we hope will be a pivot for the industry on growth.
Great, thanks, Nick. So we're going to wrap up the session today, but we've had a very big live audience today. So I realized there was lots of questions that went unanswered. We'll try and cycle back on some of those and get some answers to you by email. So thanks for sending those in. Thanks for interacting with us and joining us today. Thank you very much, Manish, for joining us and giving us the benefit of your knowledge.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate. I just want to say in the closing part, I have a 12-year-old daughter. I want to get her off the phone, and yet I want the telcos to make more money. Because so, and that I think is possible as we continue to find ways for monetizing better, because she can't afford this much money, the amount of phone that she uses for all her apps. So I think there is a nice need that I have to get the addiction off, but get more money into the telcos banks.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Nick.
My pleasure.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We're going to close up the session for today. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Manish. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.